The galaxy is vast, endlessly vast. Its arms stretch into the blackness like the branches of some ancient tree, each branch heavy with stars, each star surrounded by its own retinue of planets and moons. And on those planets, life takes root, sometimes fragile, sometimes resilient, always fleeting. In the silence between those stars, there is peace. Not true peace, not lasting peace, but the illusion of ether, stillness of empty void, the hush of 1,000 forgotten worlds, abandoned to time. The cosmos hums softly, like a lullaby for those who drift across it, unknowing of the storms that forever gather. Close your eyes, picture it. A lone planet turning slowly in the black, its surface scarred by ancient craters, its mountains worn smooth by winds older than empires. Nothing stirs. Not yet. For a moment, you might think such a world is safe, untouched, a place where silence reigns eternal. But silence, in this galaxy, is never forever. It is only a pause, a breath, a calm before something louder, something stranger, something that will sweep away every quiet thing you thought would last. The old ones knew this. Long ago, when the galaxy was younger, they feared the creeping shadow of their enemies, the Necrons, cold and merciless, and the Catan, those starborn predators who fed on life itself. The old ones, wise beyond measure, sought to create protectors, not soldiers of discipline or knights of shining purpose, but something more primal, something unstoppable. From their desperation came a seed, not one seed, but 1 billion. Small, simple, yet brimming with possibility. These seeds fell into the galaxy like rain, unseen, unnoticed at first. But rain does not vanish. Rain nourishes. Rain grows. And so it was that a strange kind of life was born. Green, loud, crude, but inevitable. The Orks, at first glance, might seem like a joker race of bellowing warriors. More beasts than man, more chaos than order. They laugh where others scream. They build machines that should never function, yet roar to life as if by sheer force of will. They fight endlessly, not for survival, not for conquest, but because fighting is the song in their blood, the breath in their lungs, the only truth they ever truly know. But behind that laughter lies something older, something darker, not random, not accidental, deliberate. The Orks were crafted, shaped, engineered to be the galaxy's most dangerous plague, a weapon that would never end, never tire, never fade. For when one Ork falls, spores scatter. They drift unseen through the air, settle into the soil, grow in hidden places. From that decay, new Orks rise. Entire ecosystems warp into strange fungal reflections of their presence, forests of twisted mushrooms, fields of creeping mold, rivers choked with alien growth. A world touched by Orks is never truly free of them, not ever. This is their secret. Not their strength, not their size, not even their war machines. It is their inevitability. A whisper at first, then a murmur, then a roar. The WAAAGH, it begins quietly, always quietly, on some forgotten world at the edge of the Imperium, where the soil lies undisturbed and the air still carries no echoes of war. A vibration in the ground, faint as a heartbeat. A strange rhythm that has no source, no explanation. The kind of sound that makes animals stir, makes children cry in the night. The kind of sound you feel in your chest before you ever hear it with your ears. Boom, boom, boom. The drums of the Orks. They are not real drums, not yet. No leather stretched, no wood carved, no hands pounding a rhythm. And yet, the sound is there. A psychic echo, carried not through air, but through thought. The orcs are coming, even before they arrive, even before their ships blot out the stars. The WAAAGH precedes them. A storm of energy, of laughter, of violence waiting to be born. Worlds fall silent before it. Farmers pause, mid-harvest, tools resting in their hands, as though they've forgotten why they were working. Priests at their altars look up suddenly, uncertain why the prayers in their mouths feel hollow. Soldiers on their watchtowers grip their weapons tighter, though they cannot say what they fear. The orcs are not there, and yet, somehow, they are. That is the horror of it. The old ones gave them a gift, a collective mind, not in words or thoughts, but in belief. 1,000 orcs together believe a machine will work, and it does. 1,000,000 orcs together believe victory is certain, and the galaxy itself seems to bend toward it. They are chaos disguised as certainty, madness masquerading as truth. And when they gather, when their voices join as one, when their feet stomp the ground in unison, when their crude banners wave against the skies, the WAAAGH is born. It is not just an army, it is a storm, a tide of green and iron, of smoke and fire, of laughter and death, and you will hear it before you see it. Always the whisper of drums, the vibration through the earth, the strange pull, like a crowd gathering in the dark, waiting for something you cannot see. Boom, boom, boom. Do you feel it now? The silence of the galaxy was never meant to last. Asterisk, listen close and breathe slowly. Let the rhythm of your chest match the hush of a distant world turning. The story we tell now is of flesh and fungus, of laughter that becomes law, of something that grows not merely through hunger, but through belief. It is a quiet thing to speak of such horror at night, and yet the way to understand the WAAAGH is to begin small, with spores, with a single crook of green muscle, with the patient pulse of a thing that will not be denied. There is no simple taxonomy for the orcs, if you ask the polite scholars of the Imperium. Their anatomy mocks neat lists. They are not human, though they bear a crude, disposable resemblance. They are not beasts, though they often smell of damp earth and wild hunger. You might be told they are a fungus, or that they are a feral offshoot of some ancient experiment, or that they are the cunning of some older, crueler architect. All of these answers are true, and none of them contain the whole dot at the smallest scale. Look for the spores. They do not announce themselves with trumpet or blaze. They are patient, almost shy. A single orc's death, a severed limb, a mildew corpse collapsing into a trench, releases a scatter of microscopic seeds. These spores are light as breath. They hitch to boots, to feathers, to the wind in the tiniest eddy. They float in the dark places where light seldom visits, the undersides of leaves, the seams of old uniforms, the cracks in a Kirkus temple. Stone, there they sleep. Sleep, however, is not the end of their story. Sleep is preparation under the warmth of sun or engine heat, under the damp of a cellar or the steamy breath of a wet jungle. The spores wake. They find soil like eager mouths. They find the gut of a dead rat, the pulp of a fallen leaf, the warmth of a wounded hand. From them grows a green thing, at first small, then expansive, a tangle of mycelial lace beneath the surface, unseen but all-reaching. That mycelium does not merely feed, it remembers. Memory, in the fungal sense, is different from the tidy memory of an organ or a mind. Fungal memory is pattern. It is the chemical echo of contact, the record of what has nourished and what has been resisted. This web of green shares nutrients, sure, but it also shares instruction. The Ork mycelium is an archive. It encodes tendencies, habits, a template, where spores sprout in the right abundance and temperature, where the mycelium finds enough warmth and decay. The green template calls forth a body. Flesh grows around that pattern thick. Coarse muscle laid over abrasive ribs that are themselves woven from porous, resilient bone. Skin is a corked leather, green or brown or bruised black, ridged for the grip of the fight. The mouths are broad, the teeth blunt and many, designed for tearing and chewing rather than delicate speech. Limbs are thick, ending in blunt fingers, or in the cruel teeth of hoof-like feet that take root in the soil. Their senses are crude and enormous, smell as broad as a field, taste as a scoring edge upon the world, hearing that catches the cadence of the ground itself. To be born of Ork. Fungus is to arrive made for contact, for collision, and yet there is more. In the marrow of that bone, in the gel between the ribs, lie pockets of something not wholly biological. Wires, like veins, fluted plates, nodes of metal that embed and pulse like shells. These are not grafts made after birth. They are co-formed, growing in concert with flesh. Metal and flesh weave together as if one were always meant to hold the other. The crude gear of an Ork is not applied. It is part of their architecture. A shoulder might sprout a tube for venting smoke. A forearm might take on the shape of a claw already seen in prototype on far-off battlefields. The Ork body is a hybrid, scaffold, fungal, muscular, mechanical, all engineered to survive and to prod the world into answering violence with more violence. It is easy to imagine these things as accidents of nature. It is simpler to laugh and point and call them brutish. But beneath their rib cages and within their marrow there is a design. Whether the old ones forgave themselves, for it matters little now, the design endures. The Ork is built to reproduce, to spread, and to remake its surroundings after its fashion. Where they make camp, the land answers by shifting. Trees take on fungal blooms, rivers taste of iron. Animals grow thick green pelts and bite with blunt teeth. Entire ecosystems become Orky in time, not because the Orks consciously terraform, but because their presence is a kind of contagion. The world reshapes itself to bear them. This is the first soft terror. The Orks do not merely occupy, they convert. When we speak of Ork technology, and the scholars who survive to write histories insist on calling it mech rather than technology, we must unlearn a kind of neat rationality. To study an Ork gun under a microscope, to set aside emotion and call it a machine, is to be fooled. The true power of Ork invention does not live in precision metallurgy or in elegant circuitry. It is a matter of faith. Orks believe their things will work. That belief is a physical force within their culture. It is transmitted socially in the same way a song becomes a chorus. Consider an example. A wagon, crudely bound with nails and panels fitted with a tapered barrel and a handful of pistons. To a mechanic with training and tools, it should be a laughable, combustible heap. To an Ork who has hammered a starting plate and declared, in a voice as loud as thunder, "Dis. 1L go," that wagon becomes more than wood and iron. The Ork's conviction wraps around the object like a mantle. It feeds the mechanisms. Paint chips off in a pattern that is almost like scripture, and wherever an Ork has spat into the breach and swore at the thing, it answers with a sputter and a roar. This is not merely superstition, there is a psychic component to it. Orks are born into a culture of practiced certainty. Their minds are tuned to expect outcomes of violence and victory. When they gather in numbers, their expectations amplify. A dozen orks believing a ramshackle engine will fly makes that engine more likely to function than 100 engineers despairing at its failure. A squad of screaming orks, confident in the worth of a claw, will make that claw sever boneware. Physics might otherwise balk. Belief is a force in their universe. It bends probability, warps causality by degrees. The orks do not have an abstract mathematics of it. They have songs and oaths, rituals by which faith is shared and repeated. Their mech boys, the smiths and tinkerers who make these things, are priest-like more than scientific. They learn the right words to shape the tools, the right curses to nail on the plates. In their hands, a scrap of metal is not scrap, but an instrument of prayer. Their workshops ring with the clang of hammers and the cadence of approving laughter. A weapon that would not fire in isolation will roar when a crowd of orks chants its name and slams a fist into its side. There is a danger here for the rationale. Mind. To study an ork gun is to feel its charisma begin to tug at your own certainty. The mind can be worn thin. Under the weight of ork belief, small, unlikely things begin to happen more often than chance would allow. When enough orks declare a thing real, an airplane that is really a flying bus, a red-painted cannon that shoots truer than a blue-painted one, reality begins to acquiesce. In the presence of sustained communal conviction, physics takes on a negotiable tone. This explains much of the orks' success. Their crude transport, known as trucks, cross broken plains where better-made vehicles falter. Their scrap-built flyers spin through low atmosphere and manage improbable maneuvers. Their guns sometimes misfire, and sometimes they fire twice, in a way that makes learned men weep, because the logic of it is not theirs to unpack. Engineers who try to overlay blueprints on ork designs find those plans fraying at the edges as if a stronger grammar insists otherwise. It is maddening and terrifying in equal measure, but the heart of their power is not even the thing that moves beyond science. It is the social ritual around it. The more orks who cheer for a machine, the more its reliability increases. The more times they chant for a fighter to fall, the more likely it will. It is as if the universe keeps accounts with constellations of conviction, and the WAAGH is the balance tipped until it collapses into a single resonant act. And yet, belief alone cannot explain the full horror. The orks possess a psychic field, a peculiar phenomenon described inadequately in the crude lexicons of men and adeptus institutions. Call it a field, or a hum, or an ambient insistence. The ork presence warps more than metal. It warps thought. Imagine being within earshot of a bonfire where a dozen orks are singing. Now imagine the sound is not only air, but a pressure, a tide moving through the skull like cold water. It picks at certainty. It smooths complexity into blunt edges. Ambiguity is painful in its presence. Where it passes, nuance recedes. Choices simplify into the exhilaration of the attack, the bluntness of the fight. Even creatures not of ork blood feel it. Packs of beasts strain toward violence. Machines hum with a feral readiness. Small, hidden things stop hiding. The ork field is contagious in this sense. It predisposes the environment toward action. This field has a geometry. It is not uniform. A single ork emits a faint pulse, like a pebble dropped in a still pool. A mob of orks, A mob, a tribe, a warband creates standing waves. The WAAAGH is the coherent resonance of countless orc minds chanting, laughing, and expecting. When their signals align, an emergent property appears. Reality bends subtly to their insistence. It is not sorcery in the learned sense, it is systemic. The mind of the orc is a frequency, and when many such frequencies phase lock, the environment begins to listen. You might picture it as weather. A low buzz becomes a gust. Gusts form a wind. Wind raises dust. Dust becomes storm. The WAAAGH is a psychic cyclone. It picks up objects, both physical and conceptual, until the cyclone itself seems to be an organism. It has a forward edge, a center, and a tail. It moves, it eats. It leaves the world changed. The field is not always hostile to outsiders. Sometimes it merely muffles them. A traveler who walks into the periphery of a small orc camp might feel thoughts dull, as though someone placed a hand over the part of their mind that questions. They find themselves smiling at things they would usually despise. They find a certain ease in the cruelty of the orcs, a relief in the binary nature of their choices. This is the cunning terror it seduces by simplicity. The orc field does not always force the body to act. Sometimes it coerces the mind into acquiescence. Asterisk, at larger scales, the effects magnify. On a world where the WAAAGH takes hold, entire industries shut down. Rituals go unattended. The liturgies of planets, the political routines, the slow calculations of commerce falter. Machines that once hummed obediently begin to stutter in new patterns, responding to the rhythms around them rather than the hand on a control. Pilots report instruments that lie in a way that feels like a mockery. Soldiers find their training slipping away, replaced with an aching compulsion to charge. Even weather patterns might shift, because the orc field, when large enough, becomes another force upon atmospheric chemistry. Spores ride up into the jet streams and fall as green rain on far-off continents. There is an additional, more chilling effect. The orc field remembers. Where fungal mycelium keeps a material archive, the psychic weave keeps an experiential one. A field that has swept over a city will carry echoes of that city forward. When the orcs return, and they often do, for true orc campaigns are not merely campaigns but cycles. The returning WAAAGH finds sympathetic lines in the memory of the place. New orcs that arrive on a world already touched by orcish resonance find their belief amplified by the very soil. The narrative becomes self-reinforcing the first time. The impact might be violent and chaotic. Over successive tides, the place tends toward orcish habit like a muscle remembering a gait. And so every laugh, every bellow, every clatter of a ramshackle gun takes on a new register. They are not independent noises. They are metrics in the storm. They are the heartbeat of something larger. Listen to the rhythm now. Not the drums alone, but the drum of a million smaller things. Spores settling, helmets clanging, boots on packed dirt. Each is a note. The chorus makes a pattern. Where that pattern spreads, it calls forth more of itself. This is the horror seed that must be sown now in your mind. The WAAAGH is not merely an army that marches and fights. It is a storm of thought that grows louder the more it spreads. Consider a village on a temperate world. At first, there is an inexplicable vigor to the crops. Green things grow too fast, with thick stems and bitter fruit. The livestock breed with a strange fecundity, but their young are coarse, faster to attack than to flee, away from the fields. The village craftsmen notice their tools working with strange eagerness. A hammer strikes true without thought. A saw bites wood of its own accord. A few men become fascinated with the crude toys orcs make. They begin to tinker in their spare hours, drawing crude sketches, inventing a new lever, or firing a scrap of metal with an exasperated grunt. The fascination spreads. A child takes an orc scrap and calls it beautiful. A lover learns to laugh like a war cry and finds pleasure in the release. This is not a tale of seduction without cost. The corruption is slow and subtle, almost domestic at first, but with each imitation, the village makes itself more legible to orcish thought. Mycelium threads creep at the margins of their granaries. Spores sleep in the thatch. The next passing of a horde will find a land already bending. What was once resistance becomes fuel. The WAAAGH feeds on habit as surely as on flesh. Worse still, orcs learn, in their way, to harness this adaptive advantage. They are not cunning in the way humans are cunning, but they are adaptive in a devastatingly efficient manner. Mechboys and warbuses, the latter large and simple in their dominion, the former obsessively practicable, quickly recognize a pattern. A tribe learns to sally forth into the periphery of a planet, to leave behind caches of small, stable goods, a broken engine that turns on with a shove, a crude banner that makes a child clap. These things are seeds of belief. Locals adopt them, repeat the rituals, and thereby increase the likelihood that a larger engine will function when the orcs return. It is a form of cultural farming. Grow the environment until it remembers you. The WAAAGH, then, is not chaos as humans define it. It is an emergent order of insistence. Its logic is simple. Produce belief, amplify action, reshape the environment, return and take. As the cycle repeats, the WAAAGH gathers inertia. A small band becomes a great tide. Where tide meets land, cities fall away into green rot or are converted into ramparts of crude iron and living fungus. Whole worlds begin to look as if painted by the same brush. Green banners, ragged fortifications, the smell of iron and damp soil. If you can hold that image, the world becoming an extension of orcish appetite, the climate subtly altered, the instruments of civilization retuned, then you have a sense of why the WAAAGH is feared not merely for its immediate violence, but for its permanence. It is not a raid that passes. It is a movement that rewrites the grammar of place. It is a contagious idea rendered as ecology and instrument. At the center of it all sits the war boss, a crude focus of the storm. He is not a philosopher. He is a ceremonial certainty. He shouts, and his tribe answers. He takes trophies. His tribe mimics him. He grows and grows, not by gentle accretion, but by the rough calculus of orc life. The biggest and loudest capture attention and lead the rest. Around him, mech boys translate those shouts into metal and wood and soot. Together, they become nodes. In a network of conviction, each node reinforces the field. Each node makes the next easier. Around such a boss, the ley lines of the orc's psychic weather balloon upward. Listen to the laughter again, and hear not its joviality, but its function. Each laugh is a pulse. Each shout is a valve through which belief flows. The WAAAGH swells. When the voices do, it feeds on merriment as much as on slaughter. It is uncomfortably a religion of force without doctrine, a theology of momentum. Its saints are those who shout loudest and long dot. And so comes the final, bitter kernel of understanding you must hold with the rest. The WAAGH is not merely inevitable because orcs breed and build. It is inevitable because it is self-authenticating. It proves itself by the very act of proving itself. Each success begets greater certainty, and certainty shades into the force that bends instruments, minds, and soil. This is the danger that cannot be reasoned away. A single orc war may be grotesque and reckless, but it is survivable. 1,000 orcs may be a plague, but armies can resist numbers when they are trained and supplied. The WAAGH, however, is metastasis. It is pattern and faith given teeth. It is a storm that grows not simply by absorbing territory, but by altering the very seams of thought and matter where it walks. It grows louder the more it spreads because each new voice adds to the chorus. Each new field of green is a microphone turned toward the next world. So, when you imagine the orcs, do not imagine them as mere brutes. Picture instead a slow, green weather fungus and iron braided together, belief made mechanical, laughter turned into a force that simplifies, seduces, and then devours. Picture spores whispering in the quiet dirt. Picture men and women learning to mimic a crude grin and finding it oddly complete. Picture children picking up a scrap and treating it like a relic. Picture cities made into orchards of crude huts and smoking motors. Picture a planet that, in its bones, has become an orc hymn. Breathe out now, and remember this as a cautionary tale. The WAAGH is a storm of thought. It does not merely march, it insists, and the more it insists, the truer it becomes. Breathe in slowly. Feel the rhythm of your own chest. Let it match the slow turning of a planet. For a long time, on worlds like this one, breathing was enough. People rose with the pale tilt of morning, checked their instruments, walked the same worn streets, and believed that tomorrow would hold close to what today had been. There was routine, and there was comfort in routine. There was the low humming of engines, the polite creak of hydraulics, and the thin static whisper of vox canals that kept the guilds and the temples in quiet conversation. Life on this world, call it Halvran, if a name helps you anchor the image, was ordinary in that honest way that makes fear so insidious. It could not imagine any change that would not be managed by appointment, by ordinance, by schedule. That is how the quiet begins. Not with a scream, not with blood, not with the clash of banners. It begins in the small violences of life that people never call disasters. A conveyor belt that hesitates an extra half-second. A streetlight that hums instead of clicking off. A soft, persistent patter inside the granary that no one can place. The first anomalies are annoyances. They make people curse and move on. They do not yet make people hide. Take the mill by the east docks. A long, boxy thing of iron and wood, patched and oiled by 3 generations of mechanics. Its gears were a language known to the town. The first tooth signaled morning. The second matched noon. It had always failed on the same day, in the same month, like a memory that repeated itself politely. People brought carnations that day and joked about fate. Then, in the weeks that would later be studied and annotated by men who liked to name things, the mill's cadence changed. One evening, the mill continued past its usual fail and hummed on through the night, its lamps burning blue instead of steady white. The millstones ground without grain, and the dust that rose smelled not of wheat, but of damp peat and something green underneath. No one could put a hand on it at first. The millwright, a broad-shouldered woman called Mira, swore the bearings were perfect. The readings were within specification. Yet, when she climbed the catwalk and peered down into the grinding room, she found spores clinging to the inner rim. Like freckles, she brushed at them and found, faintly, a taste of iron. She wiped her hand on her sleeve and laughed, but the laugh was puckered and small. That night, Mira dreamed of green teeth and woke with a smear of slime on her cheek that could not be explained. Around the same time, the water purifiers began to cough. Filters clogged with a soft membrane that looked for all the world like mold, and then, when tested, refused to conform to any biological database. It would be easy to ascribe these things to old infrastructure, poor funding, or bad harvests. Those were simpler answers. Simplicity is a comfortable bed. People lay in it, and it held them. They did not look deeper because they did not have to. If you ask a farmer on Halvran what he first noticed, he will speak to you of the animals. Livestock change before people do. They are more honest chronometers of weather and soil. The sheep grew a little faster, their wool thickening in streaks of olive. The poultry grew bolder, pecking at strangers with bright, beady aggression. A dog that had been mild as a child's pillow turned red-eyed and bit through leather gloves. Crows that once scavenged politely at the refuse began to cluster on power pylons, their cries like cracked glass. A grandmother named Els frowned when her cat stayed gone for 3 nights and returned with its whiskers, ragged and a curious, damp smell about its fur. It padded the house in a way that made the children uncomfortable. It sat with eyes bright and unblinking. It watched, not like an animal, but like a thing that understood unfolding scenes and preferred an audience. Sensitivity to such things differs by temperament. For some, these were curiosities to be reported at the Guildhall, logged and dismissed, with a stamped hand. For others, like the young apprentice who tinkered with the mill's sensors, they were threads pulled at the hem of something larger. He found detail after detail that did not fit tidy models. A transistor aligned itself in a pattern of 3. A smear of fungus in the grain smelled of fossilized ozone. A smear in one workshop matched the smear in another, though the 2 places had no common suppliers. Patterns had begun to make themselves visible in the static. Asterisk, there was also an oddness about the weather. Not storms in the sense of thunderheads and lightning, but a littler thing, green silt in morning fog, a dew that clung to hands like tiny membranes. Farmers noticed leaves curling in a way they did not recognize. The veins of a particular tree piped a sap that looked almost like rust but smelled sweet. These were, at first, ecological quirks, but nature is patient. It gathers. The small patient things accumulate like dust on a shelf. And people noticed other things that could not be explained by machines or by biology. Instruments failed to read. A recorder in the temple would show records ticked at times that no one was in attendance. A sediment scanner at the docks would present a transposed waveform, a repetition of a rhythm that matched. Absurdly, the beating length of a drum measured far, far away. Officers would glance at one another and then flip through the logs, their brows pinched. They would write notes. In a tight hand, unaccounted resonance, possible interference. They took precautions that brought small comfort. Schedules altered. Patrols increased. An extra lamp at the granary. No one wanted to admit the word that would later spread like a bruise. Paranoia. Paranoia arrived like a rumor. Someone in The Guildhall said they felt watched when they turned their back to the street. A child said the lamplighter's smile looked too wide that week. Old Merrick, who had seen 3 wars and 2 famines, took to spitting when he passed the scrub behind the river. "There's a pull to it," he muttered, like being tugged by a crowd's hand. His neighbors laughed fondly and told him to rest easy. Merrick sat at the tavern and chewed his fingernails like a worried bird and told nobody that he had found tiny green seeds in the seams of his boots. The quiet went on. Then, because the world prefers to solve small problems within known limits, systems work, hands are skilled, people return to their lives. It is the way civilizations survive, not by noticing everything, but by deciding which things are worth noting. Halvoran chose not to notice the pattern until it was large enough to make itself impossible to ignore. It started the evening, the sky dimmed, not with thunder, not with meteor. The sky simply sprouted a shadow at the edge of the horizon, a small tattletale of something vast moving like a slow beetle. The first citizen to point it out was a girl on the roof of her family's flat, her hair braided and dusty, who thought it a cloud and then realized, with childish clarity, that the edge of the shadow moved like throats ripple. Men with better. Instruments looked and saw shapes like hulks, twisted appendages of weld and wood, trailing flags stitched from scavenged sailcloth and engine wire. They were crude ships, so crude, in fact, that they almost looked like stage props for nightmare. Plays, great iron ribs, sheets of corrugated metal tugged into makeshift wings, canvas patched with black tar, and engines cobbled from old cargo thrusters that screamed like tired animals. They were not graceful. They did not need to be. The first sighting was not of the ship itself, but of the way the world reacted to the ship. Birds fled as if thrown from branches. Tractors stalled in the fields in the middle of a furrow as if someone had called time out. A convoy of harvesters slowed, their crew, unaccountably pausing to watch a ragged banner ripple. Then laughter carried down from the sky. It was an unexpected sound. It had no harmony, no tune. It was not the measured humor of a festival. It was primal high roughed edges of mirth, and the low guttural thunder that might as well be an animal's. Challenge. The sound was redundant and wrong in the best possible way. Laughter where none should be. It slid through alleys and over rooftops and lodged in the bones of the town like a seed. Old Merrick stood with the girl, who had first noticed the shadow and felt his own chest tighten in a way that made him cough. "They don't sing like that," he whispered, mostly to himself. His voice trembled. The girl frowned and slipped her hand into his. Several people on the street, affected by the same odd pressure, turned their faces up and smiled for no reason they could name. Their smiles were small and unsteady. The first ships, the initial scouts, were not numerous. A scatter of them, like a flock broken from formation. They moved with a brutish economy. Ropes and chains dangled, and on the ropes clung crude manacles, and pig-brain-like contraptions that hissed and spat. Some carried banners painted in a lazy green, a color that seemed to stain the sky with the thought of moss. Others bore drums. These drums did not appear at first to be drums so much as hulking bellies of iron set in frames, but when they struck the air, the sound was a living thing. It rolled and folded over the town like a tide. Dogs howled. People pressed closer to doorways. Priests closed the book and listened to the beat in their skulls, turning the rosary under their fingers as if to end the rhythm. The laughter was the most dangerous thing because it was contagious. It moved like a current and took small things. With it, schoolboys who should have been practicing pen strokes began shouting imitations. Women drawing water by the well found their hands slapping the bucket in mimicry of a beat. The mimicry was innocent at first. A single punch of joy is not a catastrophe, but people repeat things. Habit turns into ritual. The sound of an orc howl seeded a new cadence in Halvoran's daily life. At the docks, the first of those strange trucks flat-fronted, ramshackle conveyances with faces welded to their grills like trophies bumped ashore. They groaned and spat, and the men who emerged from them were a sight to write about in the margins of any account. They were broad and green in places. In others, they were the color of poorly cooked meat. They laughed as if every joke in the world were theirs alone. They stepped with the casual slouch of creatures used to taking what they wanted simply because they expected it to be theirs. They did not greet with words. They greeted by pushing a man aside and taking his hat. A woman who tried to hold the hat was shoulder-checked and then given a grin that revealed teeth like a saw. She laughed in bewilderment and then kept the hat. Observe here the smallness of the first violence, its casualness. There was cruelty, yes. There was theft, there was damage. But there was also an attitude, the presence of someone who does not imagine accountability. The orc who took the hat did not imagine the owner would complain. He did not understand the concept of private property the way the townsfolk did. For him, things are found, used, and discarded in a continuum. The taking was a signal more than an action. It said, "We are here, and this is how we will be." What unnerved people more than the stolen hat were the marks left in its wake. Those who had contact with orcs, however casual or violent, found that their hands or garments took on an inert, peppery residue. The residue looked like dust at first, but when it was examined under the guild's microscopes, it behaved like spores. It spread. A lad who touched the hat and then later cut his finger found a faint green bloom at the wound's edge. The next morning, it was not infection in any traditional sense, nor was it harmless. It made him restless. He would wake at night to the sound of drums that had not been there when he fell asleep. He would stand at his window and watch the horizon like one waiting for a lover. Asterisk and the drums. The drums thickened the air. They were not always audible to the ears. Sometimes they came as a pressure, a low mechanical sadness just below consciousness. Workers in the machine works found machines stuttering into unexpected patterns, as if in time to a rhythm that had nothing to do with gears. A lathe might begin to pulse with a tempo, cutting in beats like a simple heartbeat. Where such a tempo took hold, the machinery would work with a perturbed efficiency. It was a kind of usability that was not explained by design. Tech priests, those solemn men in iron robes who sanctified machines and kept the rites of maintenance, grew worried. Not because they feared the orcs' crude hands. The Adeptus had seen worse. They feared that their data did not track. Their instruments read false harmonics. Their calibrations, the careful language by which they talked to engines, became blunt. A servo that had been singing in low, measured complaints now bellowed like a beast in joy. The priest would place his palm and chant, and sometimes the chant worked, and sometimes it did not. It was as if a new voice had answered the machine in uneducated, loud dialect that the priests did not know. The priests did not like unknown dialects. Unknown dialects make doctrine uneasy. Within households, the change was quieter but more intimate. Meals that once tasted of the earth now tasted of iron and wet leaf. A woman talking to her father during supper noticed she tasted the stew and then suddenly felt an urge to shout something she could not understand. She laughed after the urge passed, embarrassed, and did not tell him. Secrets have their own gravity. The secret here was that people's edges were softening. They were more willing to be carried by the current. His City Watch responded in the way institutions always do when a pattern is faint, with committees. Men in sober coats and the occasional woman with bureaucrats' hope talked and wrote and archived. They posted curfews for the outskirts where the first trucks had landed. They issued memos advising people not to adopt foreign fauna, not to touch strange devices, and to report any signs of unusual plant growth. Their proclamations were read after the laughter in the slow morning, by men whose faces had not yet learned to look savage at things they could not fix. The memos had the texture of paper against water, useful until the water rose. In the fields beyond the last brickwork, the spores slept and woke with seasons. They rode on the wind in a manner like rumor, light at first and then thicker as it traveled. A car driver bringing grain to the city found the wheel hubs smearing with a fine green powder. He wiped at it, joked about the poor, dry weather, and then rode on. 2 days later, some of his load sours in the granary before it should have. The souring isn't rotting in the manner of old bread, but in stripes, as if someone had painted fungus in shallow strokes. The bakers are concerned. Concern becomes an instruction sent to the inscriptions office. Instructions become action. Action is ineffective against something patient. When the first true confrontation broke across the skyline, it was not in a battle where heroes stamped and banners fell, nor in a siege where cannons crouched and rulers decreed. It was a sequence of small reckonings. A child laughed at the sight of a green face and was knocked aside by a giant who thought it funny. A farmer drove his groaning rig into a ditch because a truck blocked his way and the orcs inside wanted a look at his harvest. A factory foreman found his lines clogged with green thread that at first seemed harmless. Then irresistible workers stopped to pull it, to examine it, to knot it into small talismans. Talismans do not feed mills, but they fit into pockets. They make people smile. They make people careless. A man named Jaren, who tended the lamps in the northern quarter, later remembered watching one orc family assemble a child's toy from spare rivets and a broken compass. They hammered it together with such careless pride that for a moment Jaren felt a warmth he could not name. The toy word sputtered and flew in a small, terrifying loop before slamming into a crate and exploding into tiny green sparks. Children reached for those sparks like moths, and one of them, thin, freckled, with a cough, picked up a smudge and smeared it on his sleeve. The next morning, the child woke laughing, an odd, high, hollow giggle that had nothing sweet in it. His mother laughed with him at first, then frowned when his hands scratched at his arms with disturbing purpose. The child's sleep was no longer restful. He would wake with his fingers smelling of damp leaves and would stare long into the corner, where dust gathered as if expecting figures to emerge. The first skirmishes were messy and small. A city watch squad encountered a group of orcs in the market and returned with more scarred than satisfied. Their rifles jammed. A simple scrap of orcish metal seemed to stutter weapons, as if mocking them. A patrol on the outskirts reported that their cums came in with laughter overlain like an unwanted chorus. Officers tried to call for reinforcements and found their orders returned with static, with a tiny echo of a drum that was not in their own regiment. The men blamed faulty equipment. The men blamed the mood. They did not yet blame the WAAGH. The horror in these early days was not the kind of singular violence that could be chronicled in ledger lines. It was an erosion, an attrition of habit. Uncertainty. People found themselves in a new world that used the same streets and tools, but answered differently. Machines no longer merely obeyed human commands. They suggested other courses. Instruments that had read the world reliably now filtered the noise differently. Men who had been brave in past conflicts felt humorless and heavy when the drums struck. The drums made courage feel like a child's game. They simplified thinking in the worst possible way. The Orks were not a simple siege engine. They were a culture that borrowed the world and used it until the world began to look like them. Their artillery was not only their guns, but their way of living. Their rough joy that made others blink, smile, and then do the same. Where grin became habit, the land offered its own cooperation. The inevitability was the most terrible thing. Of all, not that they could be fought in a pitched battle, but that the very ground could revise itself in their image, weakening resistance from within. One night, when the military would later claim to have repelled an early landing, the town's squares were full of smoke and dust. Men shouted orders. Guild bells rang. The Orks fell through a gate like a loose spill of rope. They poured in and were every kind of messy. Halvrin's defenders fought as well as could be expected. There were moments of true courage and sober calculation, of camaraderie in the blast, of gunfire, but those who watched later from the safety of history have a tendency to overlook the internal losses. The baker who, having pushed an orc off his counter, found himself wiping a smear of green from his knuckles and then pausing to hum the guttural chant because it felt like an easier motion than rage. The mother who, after a night of gunfire, found her voice altered subtly, that her lullaby had gained a weird, rhythmic tack that matched the orc drums. The battle ended with a draw that was not a true victory. The orcs were pushed back from the main square. Some were killed. Many scurried into the alleys and up onto roofs and away into the fields. But as dawn unfurled, the fields themselves were different. Cornstalks along the road had sprouted wider leaves with deep green veins, and where the orcs had dragged a banner across a fence line, a new kind of moss took root, bright and unfriendly. The defenders counted their losses and found their hands for the first. Time sticky with an unfamiliar sap that smelled faintly of iron and laughter. Standing in that dawn, the town's leaders felt something that had no neat translation into memos or proclamations. It was not merely the failure of tactics. It was a sense of inevitability so tactile it might have been a wind. The knowledge that even if they chased orcs from the town would not entirely return to its prior shape. Parts of it had been retuned. Some lines had been crossed. A quality of response had been altered. It could be repaired, perhaps. It might even be purged with time and care and sacrament. Except the orcs were not content to linger far away. They came in waves, and waves build upon the softening of shores. This is where the true terror nests, in the quiet places of the world, in habits that make living bearable, in the small gestures that make people themselves. The orcs do not always break things at once. They teach the world to sing a new song, and once a song is learned, even if one does not like it, it is remarkably hard to forget. On the 5th week, as the sun lay thin and the harvest had half been gathered, a child ran into the square bearing a banner that his playmates had painted with a crooked symbol. He ran and shouted, "WAAAGH," in a high, delighted squeal. The word fell on the crowd like dust. A woman picking herbs looked up and felt her fingers twitched with uncharacteristic energy. A man folding cloth found his stance widened without thinking. Someone laughed, first softly, and then another, and another, until the laughter that had come from the sky felt answered. The sound gathered and strengthened as voices joined it, and with each joining, the promise of the WAAAGH swelled like a bell drawing its clappers closer. This was the moment the town understood, in a way that mattered, what it was facing. It was not merely a matter of being invaded. It was not a problem solved with patrol rotations or tribunals. It was an infection of habit, of expectation. It was a rewriting of the small and private. You could fight the bodies you saw. You could not somehow fight the idea that people could be made to prefer the orcish cadence. That idea, once caught by the ears of a city, could spread faster than any bullet. And so the inevitability settled in like a slow, patient rain. It sank into the foundations and the families. It sat on the schedule in the guild halls. It took root around the lamplighters' rounds and the prayers whispered under breath. It taught a town how to laugh in a new way. When you imagine fear as a physical thing, and it is safe to do so for the sake of this tale picture, it as a tide that asks politely at first, and then demands. The first tides do not knock houses down. They wet the thresholds, bring in pebbles and seaweed, teach the inhabitants to step differently. Only afterward do the waves rise with teeth. Listen now for the last sounds of this chapter, not the cannon nor the cries, but the quiet, persistent drum underfoot, the soft scratch in a child's sleeve, the scratch that grows like a signature. Across a page, know that the world changes in small gestures first, and that is the most dangerous kind of change. The orcs do not burn everything at once. They plant, they play, they pull, and then they returns stronger, because everything they touched already hums with their name. Close your eyes if you must. Hold the rhythm of your breath. The next chapter will wake with a sound you will not be able to ignore. The WAAAGH is learning. The world is learning. And already 1,000 small things are beginning to answer in unison. Asterisk, listen. Hold the slow, steady breath you have been keeping. Let it be a metronome against the noise to come. For a long while, the story walked the small margins, spores in the seams, laughter in the wind, children taught to shout a word they did not mean. Now, at last, the tide rises. The WAAAGH gathers weight like a storm. It is not a single shout. It is a mountain of voices folding over themselves until sound becomes pressure and pressure becomes weather. The drums begin beneath the feet. At first, no one knows where to look. The ground vibrates like a slow, enormous heart, a pulse that presses up through souls and bone. Dogs whine and bury their heads. Lamps swing in their brackets, though there is no breeze. The cadence is patient, but it is relentless. Boom, boom, boom. It is the kind of rhythm that burrows into marrow. It does not merely reach ears. It finds the empty spaces in thought and fills them. A column of green approaches the city like a slow black tide, not advancing in lines so much as in an appetite. Ranks are loose. Gaps gape and then are filled by waddling figures and hulking engine-wreathed monstrosities. Their banners are stitched from scavenged uniforms and tarpaulins, painted with crude glyphs and the jagged grin of some shared joke. Between the orcs are machines that should not function. A walker that looks like 2 steam boilers, stacked and bound with chains. An aircraft whose wings are a collage of hull plates and patched canvas. A cannon whose barrel is a gutted pipe, festooned with prayer raspings and teeth. They roar because they are expected to roar, and they roar because that roar convinces the world to let them dot at the perimeters. Once clever barricades are trampled before proper battle lines can form, A defense regiment, drilled in the slow calculus of attrition, finds its formalities buckling. Officers bark orders, the cadence of their commands sharp and practiced, but as they shout their words come back at them as a distorted echo, stitched with a bass undercurrent that sounds suspiciously like laughter. Men exchange glances, and where there should be hesitation, there is an almost electric brightening, like a man who suddenly remembers how to run a race he had forgotten he ever trained for. Hands that have steadied cannons for years twitch toward bayonets with an excitement that tastes of adrenaline and something else, a foolish, childish joy in the idea of smashing faces. You must see this joy not as mirth, but as engine. The Orks' pleasure in violence is not an aside, it is their fuel. Their grins are the spark plugs of a machine that translates want into world change. When they cheer at the popping of a head, that cheer is a vote cast. A chorus of votes accumulates into a pressure that pushes the improbable forward. A gun that should seize begins to cough and fire. A tank that should stall breathes and lurches. Machines that were taught to obey nuance now obey insistence. In the center of the city's defense echelon stands Mogos Dominus Valon Hoth, an adeptus mechanicus of a clean old lineage. He is gaunt beneath the robes, wires like roots at his jaw, ocular implants glassing his pupils into pinpricks of red, where most citizens felt a general mood and a pressure at the back of their minds. Mogos Valon felt the grammar of the world change like a misprinted book. The readings on his auger screens contradicted him. Cadences in the servos translated into little riddles. He is a man trained to pass error. He is a man who believes, with the full, patient fervor of his order, that a machine is a text to be read and corrected. He has spent his life talking to engines the way others talk to children, in slow, patient tones that teach. Today the engines talk back, but not in the language he knows. He watches a field gun, model old and respected, whose barrels are lined in the fashion of a cathedral. Its crew shout their choruses and push the breech closed. The Margos watches, the logs and the volt scores, and the hydraulic pressure. He calculates wear and force. He recites calibrations. The gun shudders and the shell leaps free in an angry bloom of iron. It hits an Ork truck half a mile off, and where physics suggests splinter and scatter, the truck steadies on axis and lurches on as if the impact were applause. A portion of its side shears away and becomes a new banner. The Orks cheer and the Truox engine purrs like a satisfied animal. Mogos Valon reads the output and expects anomaly and error. Instead he feels, with a creeping cold under the crown of his skull, a new parameter. Probability shifted. He paces, hands trembling around the staff rod. His augmetic whirrings speak in clipped vowels. Server skulls dart like anxious flies at his shoulder, recording and broadcasting his thoughts to the fortress temple. Through those skulls comes a chorus of confirmation. Drums. The skull's microphones pick up a bass vibration at 34 Hz, a frequency that, in Valon's study, books is associated with tectonic rumblings. Here it is tuned to laughter. The books do not have a page for that. A soldier he knew from childhood stumbles to the Mogos side, eyes bright and wet with the fever of battle. "Watcher," the soldier says. Voice gone thin, they sing. He laughs at the admission as if it were folly, and then, surprise, delighted, turns the word into a war cry of his own. He shouts, and, as he shouts, the weapon he holds answers with an unexpected clarity. The Margos grips the man by the shoulder and feels his own hands vibrate with something that's not purely fear. Fear is present, old and bitter, but under it is a different sensation, something like vertigo edged in elation, as if the world were offering a new type of order that Memento had never before catalogued. Valen makes his way to the engine works. There, men in grease and patience tend two contraptions like pets. They paste oaths onto gears, whisper formulas into bearings, and keep the old ways of the mechanicum, because to them ritual is maintenance. When the Orks field approaches, the men's hands begin to move differently. They pound with a drunken joy, hammers fall and strike with a rhythm that matches the drums. Each hammer strike is an incantation and also a vote. Wherever that rhythm takes hold, a broken linkage rejoins. A crashed flyer's stabilizers align. Valen has read of such phenomena in the cautionary annals, but never this near, never so many in quick succession. The mathematics of probability, once his home, feels crowded and small, outside, in the ruined plaza. Ork stompers, great jury-rigged walkers of patchwork armor and obscene proportions, stride like small mountains. Their feet smash pavements into fountains of dust. Their weapons belch a sound that is more exultation than explosion. Men cower, then stand, then advance, their faces stripped by an urge that maps too neatly onto the Ork happiness. It is terrible to watch, comprised of rage and joy. The defenders' compliance comes not from treachery, but from their nervous systems being rewired by the field. To fire at an Ork properly is to feed its chorus. To flinch is to give it a note. Both are choices that end in giving it what it needs. Flesh tears and metal crumples in displays of a Yardang's cruelty. A noble house is rolled by a truck that resembles a behemoth, and, where crumpled stone speaks, the survivors share tales of strange compassion. An Ork lifts a laughing child from the rubble and sets the child upon his shoulder in a crude mimicry of a father's gesture. The child, inexplicably delighted, giggles and points at the sky. The presence of a tender moment among such brutishness is not peace. Instead, it is the WAAGH, calibrating new meanings into old gestures. Where someone sees kindness, another hears the drum and feels the urge to answer with violence. The Orks scatter these contradictions like seeds. There is a sequence of moments that will haunt Magos Valen. He records them in the red notes of his log, which his skull host will later seal and deliver to the Collegia for study. He writes of a flyer that, on its first sortie, should have exploded from a structural shear, its wing braced by a half-stitched strip of canvas and a prayer. It hangs in the sky and notes the Ork presence with a single, clear pass over the enemy. The pilot, a woman who once tutored Valen's niece, rolls her shoulders and laughs mid-flight at the exhilaration of the stunt. The aircraft answers her glee with a new responsiveness, instruments that yesterday were the language of engineers. Now listen to laughter. The pilot loops and dives and lives. Valen writes the equation. Emotional input versus mechanical failure. The numbers do not reconcile. Asterisk on the ground. Moments of real horror stack like plates. An entire row of defenders, their nerve chemistry, rewritten by the field's siren call, charge a convoy and are crushed beneath treads. Civilians who had barricaded themselves to safety open their doors to strangers who grin and say they came to help. They are not always lied to. The Ork who assists in hauling a cart of rubble may, in the act, carve something from the wreckage. That becomes a useful tool. Utility wrapped around brutality is its own corruption, because when usefulness tempers revulsion, boundaries bleed. The tech priest watches the city unravel the way a man watches a clockwork undone. By training, he is supposed to follow cause and effect. Metal fails at strain, springs fatigue at heat, circuits arc under surge. Now cause stretches and splinters under the pressure of a chorus. The function of the WAAAGH is a parody of order. It is the rhythm of certainty imposed without reason. There is a monstrous elegance to it. Everyone's beliefs translate into outcomes, not because they are right, but because the WAAAGH makes them so. It is not merely chaos. Chaos is random, messy, unrepeatable. The WAAGH is repeatable, efficient, and predictable in a manner that is almost bureaucratic. It is a tyrant that organizes with a grin. Valen's faith in the machine god is an iron anchor, and he prays as he has always prayed, in clipped mechanical cadences, tending to engines as two icons, but the prayers fall on a new ear. The WAAAGH amplifies the rawness of his technician's passion and the crude chants of the Orks until the two sounds converge. Where they overlap, machines manifest new behaviors that neither the Sacred Emporium nor the Collegia have codified. He feels his doctrine wobble like an old dial. He feels, too, a corruption not purely of machine, but of meaning. Rituals no longer guarantee outcomes, because there is a louder ritual, one that does not care for the structure of his vows. As the day wears, the city's map of causality becomes a palimpsest. Old lines of influence fade under the starker strokes of the Orkish chorus. Men who had been soldiers in previous wars find themselves laughing at the sight of a skull mask as if it were a carnival prop. Wives who had tended gravely to prayer books now find their pages stuck with greenish spores that insistently bloom into small tendrils. The more these oddities accept them, the more ready they are to be accepted by Orks when the Orks return, bearing more than broken weapons and crude toys. The WAAAGH is a feedback loop. Violence begets delight. Delight begets more functionality. More functionality begets further violence. It eats not to end, but to continue. By dusk, the cadence reaches something like a roar. The air itself is dense with spores. The light is a smear of green and smoke. The Magos, who has burned through prayer and logic until both are brittle, stands on the parapet and watches the horizon. He is not a man given to melodrama, yet he finds himself saying aloud half to the empty air, half to the recording device at his brow in observation that has no home in his liturgies. We built our engines to obey a heaven of rules. They now obey a hymn of cruelty. That night, the city does not sleep in the way it had. It dreams, but its dreams are full of drums. Even those who move through the alleys, attending to wounds, hum, unconsciously, the rhythm of the WAAAGH. It sings through bone and wire. The loop tightens. Every fired weapon, every crushed banner, every laugh and cry adds a note. The field grows. Louder because it counts voices and finds them ready to sing. You may look now for a last, formal line of battle that ends with a hero raising a sword or a general winning a campaign. There is no such tidy end. The crescendo is not a climactic blow, but an acceleration. It is a tempo that slams doors closed on old certainties and opens new ones that will not be easy to close. In the echo of that acceleration, the city learns a truth that Valen runs through the register of his mind like a blade. The WAAAGH is not anarchy's child. It is order with its teeth bared, predictable, efficient, and hungry for continuance. Where men try to resist, their resistance often simply shapes the storm to be stronger. Where they fight with fear, they fuel the thing that feeds on fear. Where they laugh to survive, they thicken its chorus. Mogos Valen lowers his head. He tastes metal on his tongue, the temps of wires unsoldered and promises reneged. He knows now, a terror beyond simple destruction. Destruction ends with ruins. This will not end with ruins. It will end with the world forgetting it had ever been otherwise. The WAAAGH does not merely win battles. It teaches the world to answer to its name. Outside the ramparts, the drums keep time. Boom, 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 the orcs sing. The city sings. Back, the earth remembers the rhythm and begins, of its own accord, to keep pace. And somewhere, in the tangled comfort of noise, a child who had been taught to hide under blankets reaches out and sings the last line of a chant that will turn to habit. WAAAGH. Asterisk, the storm begins quietly. First, it is a distant murmur, a vibration so faint that the mind almost dismisses it as imagined, like thunder echoing beyond the horizon, too far away to threaten, but too real to ignore. A quiver in the soil beneath. Steel-booted feet, a tremor that makes vox units crackle with static. It spreads not as sound, but as pressure, as rhythm, as heartbeat. Boom, boom, boom. The world itself seems to respond, as though the stone bones of mountains carry the pulse, as though the sky itself shudders to the cadence of something vast approaching. Asterisk 4. The citizens of this imperial world. It begins in dreams. Farmers wake in the night, clutching their chests, swearing they heard drums beneath the earth. Manufacturing workers halt their labors for a fraction of a second, unsure why their hands froze on levers and gears, only realizing after that their breath had unconsciously fallen into rhythm with a phantom beat. Priests whisper that the emperor tests their faith. Children giggle as if playing a game, pounding their hands on tables in sync with the pulse. No one speaks of it directly for fear of naming it, of giving it power. Yet every man, woman, and child begins to feel it. The drums grow louder, asterisk, when it comes. It comes not as music, but as contagion. The booming rhythm is joined by a roar of voices, a chorus of laughter, a tide of savage glee that spreads faster than fire. The sound climbs into the wind, echoing across valleys, slipping through vox systems unbidden. Administratum clerks attempt to filter the transmissions, to jam the frequencies, but still the voices seep through. The laughter does not stop. It does not pause to breathe. It rolls like thunder and scrapes like rusted iron. It is not a single voice, but millions, a unity of madness. The drums become boots, the boots become an army, and the ground itself trembles. Asterisk from the void, crude shapes appear, jagged silhouettes of ships stitched together from the bones of wreckage, their engines vomiting flame, their hulls laughing in defiance of physics itself. They should fall apart, they should disintegrate upon entry, and yet they do not. They burn across the sky like meteors, their descent accompanied by manic war cries that carry even through the vacuum of space. Citizens gather in awe and terror as the first hulks break through the clouds. They are not sleek or beautiful as imperial craft, nor are they elegant like Eldar vessels. They are insults to engineering plates, bolted with no symmetry, cannons attached with no regard for balance, and yet, impossibly, they fly. The people do not understand why, but one man does. Asterisk Magos Explorator Xyranthatin 91 watches from the sanctum of his manufactorum spire. His flesh is long gone, replaced by bronze and steel, his thoughts a symphony of logic and machine code. He should feel no fear. He should feel no hesitation. His creed is pure. Trust in the Omnissiah, in the divinity of the machine, in the perfect logic of the universe. Yet as he observes the Ork ships, something in him fractures. Impossible, he hisses through vox grills, voice flat, devoid of tone. Engines unstable, hull stresses beyond threshold, weaponry unbalanced. His bionic eyes calculate trajectories, probabilities, stresses. Every number screams collapse. Every equation predicts destruction. And yet his optics show only survival. The ships do not break. The weapons fire. The engines roar. They should not work, and yet they do. He calculates again. He runs models. He simulates collapse. And still reality refuses to conform. It is not physics that governs these things. It is not logic. It is belief. The realization hits him like a hammer. Asterisk, the Orks pour from their landing craft like a green tide. They do not creep. They do not advance. Cautiously, they charge, roaring, weapons firing, fists pounding against armor, their voices merging into a single cry. WAAAGH. The cry shakes the world. It fills lungs unbidden. Some Imperial soldiers feel the urge to scream with them, to join in, to release themselves to the madness. For the WAAAGH is more than a shout. It is a psychic storm. It is the collective will of a species weaponized into sound, into pressure, into a reality-bending plague of noise and fury. The Orks do not merely fight, they celebrate. Every strike of their crude axes is a song. Every detonation of their unstable explosives is a punchline. Every death is greeted with more laughter, for death is nothing when spores guarantee rebirth. To fight them is to fuel them. To fear them is to empower them. And soon, even those who resist feel their will unravel. The WAAAGH seeps into the cracks of the mind, bending thoughts toward chaos. Asterisk, MAGOS, Zyron watchers as tanks. Malfunction then inexplicably function again in the Orks' favor. A chimera's fuel line ruptures, spilling promethium. Yet, instead of exploding, it continues to run, spewing fire from its exhaust like a demented dragon. Las guns overheat, power cells drained, and yet the Orks' crude sluggers keep firing, the rounds defying every rule of ballistics. He cannot accept it. He cannot deny it. His logic collapses beneath the weight of absurdity. The Orks believe their machines work, and so they do. The Magos runs diagnostics on himself, certain that corruption has infected his cogitators. Yet the answer remains the same. Reality itself bends around them. Not chaos, not sorcery, something worse. Asterisk, for chaos is madness untethered. Chaos is unpredictability, the storm without direction. But the Orks, they are not chaos. They are certainty. They are inevitability. Their madness is ordered. Their violence is structured. Every Ork, no matter how brutish, contributes to the same rhythm, the same beat, the same storm. The WAAAGH is not disorder. It is parody. A mockery of every attempt at reason, at structure, at empire. The Imperium fights for survival. The Orks fight because it is fun. The Imperium builds to endure. The Orks build to break, and yet their works endure regardless. The Imperium clings to faith. The Orks are faith, embodied, weaponized. The Mogos finally understands, and he despairs. Asterisk, the battlefield becomes unrecognizable. Cities crumble under stomping gargants that sway with impossible stability. Walls shatter not from bombardment alone, but from the psychic weight of thousands of throats screaming in unison. Flesh is torn, metal ripped apart, and still the laughter continues, and it spreads. Imperial soldiers begin to grin through bloodied teeth, some screaming with the Orks, even as they die. Vox units pick up echoes of the WAAAGH, cry across channels that should be secure. The laughter worms its way into minds, into dreams, into prayers. The tech priest records it all. Every detail, every impossible equation, every defiance of law. But the longer he observes, the more his logic decays. His binaric chants lose rhythm. His prayers falter. He begins to laugh. Asterisk, the horror is not in the battle. The horror is not in the death. The horror is that the WAAAGH cannot be stopped, for the WAAAGH is not an army. It is not a war. It is a storm, a plague, a truth, a self-sustaining loop of violence and joy that feeds itself, grows itself, and consumes everything in its path. The Orks are not invaders. They are inevitability given form. The ground trembles, the drums roar, the laughter spreads, and the Mogos whispers with his last shred of logic, "This is not war. This is eternity." Asterisk, the Orks are everywhere, not merely on the battlefield, not merely in the skies. They are in the soil, in the air, in the very rhythm of the world itself. The drums that once came from the horizon now seem to beat within his chest. The laughter that once echoed across Vox channels now seems to bubble from his own throat. Mogos Explorator Zyron Thartan 91 speaks into the recorder embedded in his thoracic cage. His voice a rattling monotone. Yet as he narrates, it trembles. A machine should not tremble. A servant of logic should not falter. But the sound escapes regardless. They are endless. I see no end. I calculate no victory. His voice fractures. He pauses, static crackling, across his Vox as though reality itself interferes. They should not exist. They should not function. And yet they do. They do. Asterisk, the Magos hears them before he sees them, not with augmetic ears, but in the architecture of his thoughts. Somewhere deep within the binary code of his own mind, a rhythm implants itself. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of the WAAAGH reverberates through his processor stacks. Machine spirit prayers falter, drowned by crude chants. Ere we go, ere we go, ere we go. At first, he believes it is Vox bleed, interference from unsecured channels. But when he disconnects, when he severs all data links, the sound remains. It is not outside, it is within. He cannot mute it, he cannot purge it. Asterisk, it begins subtly. A discoloration beneath the skin grafts of his remaining organic flesh, green spreading like bruises. He ignores them, at first mere chemical imbalance, he tells himself. A failure of filtration units. But then the growths emerge. Tiny filaments, hair-like, breaking through flesh and steel alike. They cling to circuits, threading themselves into augmetic ports, spores. He knows them for what they are. His breath hisses. He vents, sterilizing gases, floods his lungs with but the spores do not die. They root deeper. His own body becomes soil. He claws at his chest with mechadendrites, tearing away plating to expose the infestation. Beneath his ribs, strands of green pulse with unnatural vitality. His blood is seeded, his flesh no longer his own. Asterisk, he recalls now what he has always known, though never admitted. Orks do not simply die. Their corpses feed the ground. Their blood nourishes the air. From every battlefield, from every body, new life crawls. They are not immortal through faith. They are immortal through biology, through infestation, through inevitability. Immortal, he whispers, though his vox garbles the word, not by divinity, not by the omnissiah, by fungus, by plague. The spores drift. They grow in the soil where blood falls. They root in the lungs of those who breathe. They slumber in the cracks of cities, waiting. Even in silence they endure. Even in fire they remain. Even in exterminatus some fragment survives. Asterisk, Siren's voice grows frantic. Now, climbing octaves unnatural for his augmentics. His calm, machine-like recitation fractures into shrill bursts of disbelief. There is no end, no purge, no victory. He slams mechadendrites against walls, gouging steel, sparks scattering. The spores fall from him, drifting, seeding the ground. His every movement spreads them further. He laughs at first by accident, then compulsively. The laughter crawls from his throat, crude and jagged, alien in tone. Her. He tries to stop. He cannot. The WAAGH does not simply echo in him. It uses him. Asterisk, the Magos staggers to the viewport of his manufacturing spire. Below, the city burns. The orcs swarm across ruins, their joy louder than the screams of the dying. But beyond the battle, beyond the immediate slaughter, he sees the truth. The orcs are not invaders. They are not outsiders. They are the galaxy itself. Everywhere blood has fallen, spores grow. Everywhere spores grow, orcs return. Everywhere orcs return, the WAAGH rises again. It is not war. It is not invasion. It is not chaos. It is the galaxy's heartbeat. The endless cycle of infestation and rebirth. The eternal joke at the expense of all who resist. Asterisk, his vision fractures. His optics flicker. He sees not binary streams of data, but crude glyphs painted in blood, daubed in madness. His systems whisper, not machine code prayers, but orc chants. He is dissolving. He is becoming. Even as his logic crumbles, he recognizes the truth. His body will not die here. His flesh will not rot in silence. His spores will awaken. His infection will rise. He will return not as text priest, but as something green, something laughing. His last words are not in praise of the omnissiah. They are guttural, crude, and joyous. WAAGH. Asterisk, the orcs are not just enemies. They are not just conquerors. They are eternal, self-renewing, unstoppable. The galaxy is not theirs to win. It is theirs already. Asterisk, the voice that once spoke with mechanical precision now drifts like a broken hymn at first. It still carries the cadence of the tech priest flat, measured, logical, but beneath the surface, something has shifted. The pauses linger too long. The tones dip into strange harmonics. What was once machine clarity now carries the resonance of a whisper carried through damp caverns. A sound at once close and impossibly far. I no longer calculate. I no longer observe. I remember. And I remember not for myself, but for all who come after. Static hums around the words. The voice is calm again, soothing like bedtime storytelling. But each syllable seems stretched, as if spoken through layers of soil, through the slow crawl of roots beneath the ground. Asterisk, the war has ended, or perhaps it has not. From orbit, The planet looks silent. Fires burn low, smoke drifts, but no armies clash, no banners rise. Yet the voice continues. The drums, they do not stop. Even when ears are deafened, even when the ground lies still, they are not sound. They are memory buried deep. The earth remembers the weight of their feet. The sky remembers the vibration of their cries. And in that silence, the faintest thrum lingers, low enough to almost be imagination. The heartbeat of a dead world, still echoing. What haunts is not only the drums, but the laughter. Not loud anymore, no longer the cacophony of countless green throats howling in battle. Instead, it is the ghost of laughter. A chuckle where there is no one. A snicker heard in machinery as gears grind against each other. A half-formed word breathed by the wind as it rattles through ruins. They do not need to laugh aloud. The memory of it is enough. Every silence now holds their echo. Every shadow carries their shape. The Margos once thought in terms of data, of equations, of probabilities. Now he speaks in imagery, drifting almost poetically. The soil breathes. I feel it beneath the metal, beneath the ash. The spores are there. They curl like roots, twining through stone. They wait. They always wait. To breathe is to share with them. To bleed is to feed them. To die is to plant their seed. What was once a world of industry now grows strangely quiet. Machines have gone still, but in the silence, a green bloom stirs in unseen places. The Margos does not scream, he does not rage, he simply narrates, as if the inevitability of it all has brought him a kind of peace. Listeners may notice this voice is no longer truly his. It carries too much calm for what it says. The horror has dulled into inevitability, inevitability into acceptance, and yet, in between words, faint distortions seep through. At times, the speech is doubled, two voices layered imperfectly, original tech priest and something crude, guttural, almost jovial. The whispers overlap, until one cannot be certain who truly speaks. The drums will not stop, the laughter will not end. Even in silence, they are waiting. The narrative drifts. The voice weakens, as though the Magos or what remains of him is slipping beneath waves. Each word grows softer, stretched longer, until the pauses are filled with near total quiet. At first, only static hums. Then even that fades. What remains is an almost soothing, lull-like wind moving through grass, like distant waves upon a shore. But hidden in the hush, one can almost make out the faintest chanting. A crowd far away. A mob gathering just beyond. Hearing voices rising, then vanishing. Finally, the voice returns. One last time, hollow, distant, wrong. It does not sound like a man. It does not sound like a machine. It sounds like soil speaking, like laughter carried in spores, drifting through the air. They are still watching, even in the dark. They're waiting. Silence falls, and then so faint, it could be imagination. The echo of an orc chant ripples through the void. Ere we go, ere we go, ere we go. The sound grows thinner, farther away, until it dissolves into nothing. Only the quiet remains.